Hi, everybody. Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DL Ignite. With me today, I've got Andrew Bruce Smith. And Andrew Smith and I are going to talk about how to make your marketing better informed. Andrew is a big he's a big marketing guy. And Andrew and I, we've known each other for what, 6-7 years or something like that?
That's right.
And you're a big data guy when it comes to marketing.
Guilty as charged.
And I love Andrew because he's got some great. He sees the world in a particular way, which I think is something that we should listen to and we should learn from. But before we dig into this, Andrew, where can people get hold of you?
Okay, thanks, Tim. A couple of ways. If you Google Andrew Bruce Smith. Strange enough, the top 10 results are all me. So that's one route in, or at Andy Smith, ANDISMIT. That's my Twitter handle, and it's my handle on pretty much every network that I'm on, or Andrew at escherman.com, ESCHERMAN.com. That's how to find me.
Fantastic. And you've got a background in PR, haven't you?
Yes, this is true. Although, if you want the complete story, my career began back in 1985 as a journalist, basically, when I first started out, I thought PR stood for proportional representation. I have no idea that this whole world of public relations existed. And after a couple of years, I thought, this is crazy. PR people seem to get paid more than I do, and what an easy job. They just basically write press releases and take journalists out like me out for beer. Well, I could do that. So I joined a PR firm. I think probably within about 50 minutes of that first job, I suddenly realized, there's a bit more to it. So yes, you could say I've been working in PR for 32 years now. Yes.
And you've now recently more basically delved down in data, and you've been using that as a way of looking at probability and things in terms of the of marketing. So give us a talk about the background to that.
Sure. I guess just to kind of link it back to my background. So I started out in PR, but in the late 80s, I got to work on various technology accounts. I got to go to Silicon Valley. My one minor claim to fame that I was allegedly the second person in Britain to send a press release by email. That was 30 years ago. First PR person to build a web page, that was 1994. So I describe myself very often as an old digital native, and have also always had an interest both in, I guess, words and numbers. So certainly for somebody who comes from a PR background, I think you would find that that's quite unusual.
Yeah.
On the whole, people in the kind of PR world generally are more focused on kind of words and writing, etc., rather than spreadsheets. Although ironically, that was one of my very first. In fact, it was my first tech PR launch was for a company called Borland, who some people may remember that. I mean, they were a contender back in the day, and they launched a spreadsheet called Quattro Pro. So I got my hands and started using spreadsheets a very, very long time ago. And I guess that sparked my initial interest in data, and then databases, spreadsheets, and then really kind of moving on to getting a kind of deeper interest in data. And then, as you just pointed out, I mean, latterly taking a much deeper interest in, how do you practically take data to shape and inform decision making? And that's, I guess, where things such as probability, prediction, forecasting, statistical analysis, etc., all start to kind of come into the mix.
So how are you using data in your marketing, especially around probability and decision making?
Okay, well, I guess I should sort of divide it in two. There's on the one side, I'm trying to help people, I guess, be aware of, understand, and practically exploit some of these techniques, and without sort of being kind of unkind or unfair to, say, the PR industry, or indeed to kind of the marketing world generally. What you tend to find is that yes, I mean, for years now, people will of course say yes, data is crucially important, and we should be doing it. But we actually look at how the data is being used, what's being captured, how it's being interpreted, exploited, etc. I'd still say that on the whole, we're kind of in those sort of early early years, which is not to say that there aren't sort of, shining examples of people doing some very, very, very clever things in terms of how they're utilizing that data to help them get a deeper understanding of what's really going on. But I don't think I'm being inaccurate to say that as a general principle, those kind of perhaps more kind of advanced techniques haven't really hit mainstream yet. So lots of opportunity there.
So we're not in a position yet where we can say, if we do this, we get this result. No,
and I don't think we ever will. I think that's an important point, because, of course, as human beings, we crave certainty. I want 100% guarantee that this is going to work, and of course, nobody really does. I mean, lots of people say they can give you that certainty, but of course that's not true. Which I guess is where the probability side starts to come in. Actually, what we're really trying to understand is, what are the probabilities and likelihoods that certain things, can or could happen if these things were put in place. So, because it's that kind of, I guess, always a mindset change from how do I know for sure this is going to work versus what's more likely to work given the parameters and the constraints that I'm working within. And again, I fully understand that people's emotional reaction to that is, well, you're the expert. Aren't you supposed to know what works and what doesn't work? And I said, well, I could say that, but I would actually be deluding myself or lying or both. And the reality, of course, is that nobody has that sort of perfect crystal ball. However, the correct use and exploitation of a combination of data and probability and other techniques can certainly give you more confidence that the things that you're going to do have a greater chance of working than not, or at least giving you a more realistic perspective on what should we try and aim for.
So, do you have any examples of that, Andrew?
Let's see. Well, I mean, I guess the one that always gets wheeled out is if you take the arena of election polling, which I know isn't strictly marketing, but there's a chap called Nate Silver who, I guess, rose to fame back in 2008. Basically, his background, he started out playing poker, or actually no, rather he started out analyzing baseball statistics and applying sort of probabilities to that. Started playing poker. Anyway, he's ended up became and still is, I guess, very, very well known for his kind of poll predictions. I think it was the 2012 election where he just nailed it. He got it right. He got every single predicted every single kind of state. So suddenly this kind of wider interest in applying the statistics and probability to making those more accurate predictions and forecasts kind of came into play. Of course, in that arena, other elections since we've seen a bit of a kind of a backlash where people say, "Oh, you got it wrong," which actually I think is a misinterpretation. He never said, certainly in the 2016 election, that Hillary Clinton was guaranteed to win, or it was a virtual near certainty. He expressed it as a probability. He said there was a 70% chance, but that still meant there was a 30% chance that she wouldn't. I think he's been unfairly sort of criticized for that. So I guess the point being is that there's absolutely no reason why some of the techniques that have certainly been successfully deployed in that arena, why wouldn't we apply those in the realm of marketing? And arguably, you could say that actually some of these techniques are already being used. It's just that people don't realize that they're using them. So I'm thinking there specifically about some of the bigger platforms such as Google or Facebook. Take Google specifically. I mean, look at Google search advertising. I mean, for the last 3 years now, Google has been very vocal at saying, well, look, just tell us what you want, tell us how much you've got to spend, and literally we'll do it all for you. We will literally create the ads for you. We'll manage the campaign. We'll optimize for what you say that you want. And of course, embedded in all of that, I guess, top level talk of AI and machine learning is just applied probabilities. It's saying, if we show this ad to this person, what is the probability that person is actually going to click the ad? Or I guess, more specifically, if you've said to say Google, what I really want is people to turn up and buy stuff, that's what I want, they'll go, great, we're going to try and figure out who are the people that if we show them this are more likely to not only click the ad but end up buying the stuff that you want them to buy. So I guess it's that old William Gibson who wrote the Neuromancer novel. I'm sure he's bored to death of hearing this quote now, but he did famously say that the future's already here, just unevenly distributed. I think that's the kind of classic example where it's arrived, and not only has it arrived, it's already in use and has been available for those who wish to exploit it for a couple of years now. But again, I think the reality is that the wider world is still trying to kind of wrap their head around sort of all this stuff at all, rather than even realizing actually we could literally do this today if we felt like it. So I guess part of my mission, if that's not too grand a word to use, really is to take some of those kind of techniques and see where else can they be applied. Is this something that is only available to those really big organizations that have got the kind of the resources to deploy that, or are there things that literally any organization, if they put their mind to it, could start to utilize some of these techniques in their own marketing and PR?
And you've been talking. We've talked before about in terms of things to do with luck and random or chance or variation.
Correct.
Not necessarily be luck, but certain. And if we go looking for particular data, then we find it only because we're looking for it.
Yeah. So I think that's another sort of really sort of important concept, that sort of contrast between skill versus luck. I read lots of books, and one of my sort of favorite books of recent times is by a lady called Annie Duke, who wrote a book called Thinking in Bets. And the TLDR version of her story really is that she was studying for a psychology PhD, and she had some health issues, which meant she had to kind of take a year out. Anyway, she ended up playing poker and became very good at it. But actually now she runs a consulting business where she's taking her learnings from the world of poker and applying it to the world of business. And in the book, which is a fascinating read, where she examines that contrast with what is attributable to kind of your skill and the things that you do versus what results from literally luck, randomness, or unpredictability. And very often, as human beings, we tend to kind of have overconfidence in our skill, or we credit ourselves more than we should for the outcomes we generate. And we don't give proper credit to the fact actually we got lucky there, and that is kind of dangerous, because if you think, oh well, it's all down to me or all down to us, you will encounter situations where it wasn't you, and you got lucky that time, and the randomness and luck will trip you up. So again, this is all related to probability, accuracy of forecasting, predictions, likelihoods, all these kinds of things. And I guess one of her key tenets is how do we get better at figuring out what is down to us, so that obviously we can use that kind of going forward and to guard against being fooled, if you will, by luck, fooled by randomness.
So how do you forecast? What's the way of doing that? Okay,
so again, I keep mentioning books, don't I? But why not? Because they're useful. Yeah. So there's a chap called Philip Tetlock, who famously did a study, I think back in the 1980s, and I think he was a PhD student, and he said, well, all these people, all these pundits going around making all these kind of forecasts about what's going to happen. He said, how accurate are they? Does anybody actually bother to check up whether their forecasts actually turn out to be anywhere near accurate? Anyway, he spent literally, I think, 7-8 years compiling a huge kind of research study into the accuracy. And the short answer was that he found that actually pundits weren't very good at all. In fact, there was an inverse relationship between the kind of the visibility and fame of a pundit and the accuracy of their predictions. In other words, if somebody appeared on TV and radio constantly making forecasts all the time, a chimp throwing a dart at a dartboard was likely to be more accurate in their predictions than the pundit. So the point there is, well, what is the point? If the so-called experts are hopeless at it, what hope is there for the rest of us trying to figure out, well, what may or may not kind of happen, particularly around business decision making? Anyway, years later, he's written a kind of follow-up book, if you will, called Superforecasting, because as he said, it was disappointing to him that the key takeaway was the dart throwing monkeys, because it kind of led to a bit of a pessimism that said, what's the point at all? And he said, well, there is a point. He said, look at weather forecasting. That's got much better over the years. Compared to even 10 years ago, weather forecasts are far more accurate than they once were. So his point is, well, two things. One, is it possible to get better at it? And two, can we as individuals train ourselves to be better at forecasting? And the good news is it's yes to both of those questions. But again, you have to bear in mind that there are limits. You're never going to get perfect forecasting. Some things are more predisposed to allow themselves for forecasting. Weather forecasting, fantastic. Is this marketing campaign going to completely deliver on its objectives 100%? Give me that cast iron guarantee. Less so. However, in between, there is lots of opportunity to get better at it, and it's about, I guess, having an edge. Again, this is kind of related to the worlds of maybe poker or financial investment. You don't need to be 100% better than anybody else. You just need to be even 2 or 3 percentage points better, and that tiny edge can lead to enormous benefits. I guess just an anecdote on that. I mean, really interesting. Another interesting book about a company called Renaissance Technologies, which I suspect many people would never have heard of. But actually, Renaissance Technologies is, I think I'm right in saying, it is the world's most successful hedge fund. And it was started back in the, late 70s. And what was interesting there was that the Renaissance Technologies is one of the very first firms to bring data and technology to the realm of financial investment, and specifically hedge funds. In fact, one of the founders, Robert Mercer, he was hired from IBM, and his specialism was speech recognition. So he was using kind of data and AI and algorithms to try and figure out, how do you recognize speech? And their kind of breakthrough moment was actually speech recognition and predicting whether shares will rise or fall or investments. There's great similarities. You've got an initial amount of data to work with. How do you make more accurate predictions about what's coming next? Anyway, they do all this, most successful hedge fund in history. How accurate are their predictions? Well, they're accurate only 50.5% of the time. Just slightly better than tossing a coin. But that's the point. That 0.5% margin of difference is the edge, because they say, yeah, but we're 100% right 49.5% of the time. And that's resulted in literally, billions and billions and billions over the years of investment return and value. So it's kind of a long journey, but the point of it all is that even a marginal investment in trying to get better at prediction and forecasting can result in returns that are substantially greater than the input.
And do you see things as a process that you need to follow? So input, output.
Well, there is a process. Again, what I think is interesting is that there are some sort of eternal truths and verities, although those are the sorts of things that people are often overlooked. I mean, it may seem a bit kind of mum and apple pie, but you would always ask for any kind of marketing effort. But who is the audience? Who are these people that we think are going to do what we want them to do? Who are these people that are actually going to make that decision to buy our products and our service, etc. And I still find it instructive that even now, when you ask that question to people, they don't necessarily have a particularly very, very sort of well-defined definition of the who. They might have a kind of broad, IT decision makers. Oh, great! That narrows it down. So I guess the point there is when you've got clarity on both things like audience and clarity on what you think the real objective is, that can then help you to decide, well, which data points are the ones that we should be gathering and capturing. And that's part one. Part two, of course, is but then how do we interpret and analyze and understand that data to help us inform those decisions, or tell us, are we on track? Are we not? Our assumptions. We've assumed X, Y, and Z. Is the data actually bearing this out? I guess it comes back to a point you made at the start that again, as human beings, confirmation bias is rife, and we need to constantly guard against it. This is what I think's true, or what I'd like to be true. Oh gosh, well there's something that backs up what I want to be true. Yes, that must be right. It's really, I mean, I've had actually, it's quite ironic. I've had quite a couple of a number of examples in recent weeks where I've done some analysis and I've come up with my interpretation of it, and people's immediate reaction is, that's not what I was hoping for. I wanted to basically reinforce what I want to be true. So, the data can't be right then. Well, no, because that was the whole point. We went to great lengths to ensure the accuracy of the data. But it's interesting how people's often their immediate reaction is to say, well, the data can't be right. It's wrong because this is the answer I want. So it must be wrong. Go away and come back with some data that tells the story I want to hear. Fine if that's what you want, but if in reality you want to understand, well, what really is going on? I'm old-fashioned in that sense. I think, if you've got a handle on the truth, you've got a far greater chance of actually affecting real outcomes and real change in the real world.
So, Andrew, we actually have a watcher, which is Rob Wilmot. I don't know if you know Rob, but Rob, if you want, are you happy to take questions, Andrew?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to find out whether you accept that. I mean, Rob might not ask any, but just to say in the chat, he said that he remembers Borland. So.
There you go. You see, that immediately says that it's a person of a certain age.
Yeah. I mean, I remember Lotus. I think Borland maybe, but certainly Lotus 1, 2, 3. So what is it that we can be doing to basically use data better and understanding better within marketing?
That's a great question. How best to answer it? I mean, just kind of, based on my, day-to-day experience and day-to-day work, I guess there are sort of various common things that you come across. I mean, data in one sense isn't the issue. We're awash with it, but quite often we don't. I say we. I mean, people, particularly in the marketing field, perhaps don't invest enough in assessing and checking what I would describe as kind of data quality, data hygiene. I mean, to give you I guess a kind of trivial and yet very common example, take something like, say, Google Analytics, patently hugely kind of popular tool used by organizations everywhere of all shapes, types, and sizes. But even then, the kind of most basic hygiene check of have you installed the tracking code correctly? Because if you haven't done that properly, all those numbers that you're looking at are immediately sort of suspect. Or have you automatically applied spam and bot filtering? Because currently the default mode for GA is no. You have to proactively go in and say, I don't want to count all that bot spam traffic because it's clearly not of no use to me. Or the more kind of egregious examples where either knowingly or unknowingly people have installed, say, the tracking code twice or even 3 times, and suddenly, you're double and treble counting the numbers. I mean, there's one example I had in recent times where an organization, I had to kind of painfully reveal to them that in spite of employing armies of people and consultants, etc., that not a single person in a 2-year period had noticed that in fact they've been double counting all of their numbers. So the the kind of they'd already gone to the board, the stakeholders, with their forecast for the next year, saying, well, look, based on our numbers this year, we're predicting that we'll hit this number of users. And I had to say, well, actually, you've double counted it all. I guess if you want to tell them the truth, the last 2 years, those numbers have been inflated by 100%. The other more insidious knock-on effect is that when you have that sort of double tracking in place, numbers like bounce rate are a complete fabrication. Because what happens is that a bounce visit is supposed to be somebody arrives on the site and then leaves or rather technically leaves without visiting a subsequent page.
Okay.
So they might sit on the page for 30 minutes, but they still go. If you've got 2 or more tracking codes, then it treats every bounce visit as a non-bounce visit, because it says, well, there's 3 page views here, so it's not one. That's not a bounce visit. So you go, wow, we've got the most engaging website on the planet. Our bounce rate is about sort of 0.5%. How good are we? And you're deluding yourself, because the real number is nowhere near that, and it can lead, and as it did, lead to sort of a completely false view of what's really going on, and serious decisions being made about where to place investment that bore no relation to the real outcomes that were being sought. And to be fair, in that instance, I think is it conspiracy or cock up? And I think that was definitely cock up. That was just somebody inadvertently put the same thing on twice. But again, nobody thought, well, should we just double check that? And it took us a free plugin from Google. The tag assistant took me 2 minutes to go, oh, warning, you've got the tracking code installed twice. As Google will flag to you, not good. So that's just a very specific example of data, the importance of data hygiene and some basic checks about the validity of your underlying data.
Yeah, and again, the data was giving them the answer they wanted, which is they were the best in the world. And I think if someone giving you the best in the world, then there's something wrong, isn't there?
To be fair, it's that if you're just looking at, senior management just want to see the traffic numbers going up. Well, there you go. I mean, and I would not urge anybody watching this to do it. But if you want the kind of get rich quick way of inflating your web traffic overnight, just install your GA tracking code multiple times, and it will go up by whatever factor. Stick it on 10 times, and overnight your traffic goes up tenfold. It's a complete lie, of course. But if people are just obsessed with making the number bigger, that's the quick, dirty, and very unethical way of doing it.
So Andrew, we've had a question from Rob.
Oh, wow.
Which is, so that I'll ask the second question first, which is Google Analytics tracking code stats seem to be unreliable when compared against server-based web stats. Do you have a view on this?
I do have a view, yes.
I don't even know what he's talking about. So
no. Well, the very, very short answer to the question is yes, you're right. Basically, they'll almost never agree. If you want to have the most accurate sort of data set in terms of the true level of interaction with your website, you're entirely correct. Looking at your kind of web logs or server-based stats is almost certainly the place to go. Now, the bad news there, of course, is that requires somebody or skills and expertise and insight to not only take the data from there, but then sort of put it into some format that can be made sense of. That is the trade-off that people constantly make. Google Analytics is free, or the free version is free, and that's the one that most people use. And Google is basically saying, look, we're going to spare you all that pain of having to go and look at your own weblogs and servers, etc., and try and figure out some way of making sense of all this, and we're going to do it for you. And the trade-off is that Google says, look, the way we're going to capture data is by you put this bit of JavaScript in your HTML, you put it in there, and we do the rest. And of course, in theory and in principle, that's great, but patently there are various things that I say can go wrong, but can interfere with that process. Any web tracking that uses kind of JavaScript is always going to be sort of vulnerable to, well, does it fire correctly? There's a whole bunch of stuff there. So it's a fact of life, and anybody who's ever spent 5 seconds working with data we'll always have to acknowledge is that, that you're never going to get kind of 100% complete accuracy. That is a kind of a fantasy to expect you'll get there. But what we can do is strive to get a good enough level of accuracy that meets our needs. And I think what you'll find is that although a purist might say, yes, of course, GA is rubbish, you should use server-based stats. Well, maybe, but the reality is that if I was a betting man, putting probability on it, I don't think we're going to see a kind of a massive upsurge in weblog and server-based web analytics anytime soon. And the likes of GA and Adobe Analytics will continue as they have. However, I think absolutely what's definitely possible is for people to be more aware, perhaps, of some of those potential limitations, and just absolutely, it doesn't take much effort at all. How much effort does it take to make sure you've got the tracking code installed correctly? How much effort does it take to check the box to say, yes, please leave spam and bot traffic out of that particular view of the data, please? If that's an answer to the question.
Yeah, thank you. So Andrew, you said at the beginning that you were the second person to send the first email press release.
Yes.
So the question is, who was the first person?
Well, he's going to hate me for this, because I've dined out on this anecdote for 30 years. So the reason I can make the claim is that there was a very, very well-known tech journalist, Jack Schofield, tech editor at The Guardian, who very sadly passed away recently.
Very mature person, yeah.
Absolutely. And back in the Stone Age, digital Stone Age of 1990, there were, I think, roughly 5 journalists, and they were all tech journalists, of course, who had email addresses, and Jack happened to be one of them. So my sort of nascent email press release was sent to Jack and 4 others. It was there's a chap called Frank Amani, who at the time was the PR manager for Apple UK. So Frank gets the prize for being first, and I was second, according to Jack. But he wrote this glowing piece, because he was the tech editor for The Guardian, and he also wrote this hugely influential monthly column in a magazine called Personal Computer World. And he devoted an entire column to talking about me and Frank and how we were pioneering PR and sending information electronically, and this was going to I'm sure he bitterly regretted it later when PR email spam is still to this day probably plaguing journalist inboxes. But Frank gets the prize. It was quite nice, because I never actually met Frank at the time, and he actually left the UK and went to join Apple corporate in Cupertino, and was in California literally until a year or 2 ago. But he's actually back in the UK, and we actually met for the first time in 30 years last year. And I told him, I said, look, Frank, do you realize I've been name checking you for nearly 30 years? And he's like, good God. He said, it never occurred to him that he get the prize for being first. I said, well, I've name checked you and spread the word for that time.
Not 1990.
Indeed, yes, I know how. Where does the time go? Where does the time go?
Yeah. You're talking about floppy disks next, and
don't get me started.
Yeah.
my first work computer was an Amstrad 8256. When I worked on my first journalism job, I actually bought my own computer, because I was working a manual typewriter, and I said, this is ludicrous. And then Alan Sugar, or Lord Sugar as he is, launched the 8256. I took out my first credit card and bought my own computer, and I took it to work. And people would gather around and would marvel at this thing, and then within a month or two, the magazine had invested in buying more 8256s. In fact, one of my colleagues at the time was a chap called Brian Viner, and who subsequently he's still around, and he went on and still is, I think, the TV critic for the Daily Mail. But I famously remember there was Brian. He'd written this sort of like 2,000-3,000 word feature, and of course you had to save it on the floppy, and he pushed the wrong button and he lost. Yeah, the tears, the pain. Yeah. So there we go.
Yeah, my first laptop was a 386, and it came with AMI Pro and Lotus 123, and that's because the IT department said Microsoft Word and Excel will never take off. because no way will people allow Microsoft to dominate both the personal computer and the word processing, as it was called, their space.
That's it.
And that was it was a and you could see that. But
it's a Decca and the Beatles moment. Yes.
Yeah, guitar groups. Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to show my age now. My first computer was a Sinclair ZX81, and that had I think, was it 4K of onboard memory, and then they brought out the 8K expansion pack, and we're like, wow, 8K of expanded memory. Mind blown. What we can take over the world now.
we can produce little basic programs.
Yeah. So anyway,
Andrew, it's been great talking to you.
My absolute pleasure.
A wander through the data, and Rob, thanks for joining us as well. I've interviewed Rob in the past, and he actually wins for the most views for his interview on YouTube.
Ooh. You set a challenge now.
by a long mile. So but thanks, Rob. Thanks, Andrew, so much for joining me today. It's been
an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
And I've got 2 books that I've got to read on holiday. So hey, we're all winning.
Absolutely, win.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Cheers, Rob.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Take care.
Bye.